Lawyers of Reddit, what was your oh crap moment in court? I did jury service back in the 90s in the UK, a 4-day trial where an estate manager, dude in charge of the farms on a big landowner's estate, was on trial for growing and distributing cannabis. The police had raided the greenhouses and surrounding land and found tons of weed in all stages of production. Dude claims that he is addicted to cannabis and because his tolerance is so high after smoking so much for so long that he can only get a buzz from the very tips of the plant, where the THC content is most intense. Asks the court to believe that he just discards the rest of the plant, doesn't sell it, doesn't even give it away, just destroys the rest of the crop. So it's the last day of evidence, where both sides sum up their case and remind the jury of the salient points of what's been said. Dude himself has been quiet and respectful throughout, smart suit, softly spoken, stuck to his answers. I'd say the jury is not buying his claim, and as the judge reminds us, it's not about whether we think it should be legalized. It's not about whether we think he has even sold the remaining bits of his plants. All we need to find him guilty is to think that beyond reasonable doubt, he had at some point shared a single joint with a friend, and that was enough to convict him for supply on the counts against him. So the jury isn't buying his story, but we are also looking at him thinking he's quite old, isn't doing anyone any real harm etc, is unlikely to be running a massive dealing empire. Then on that last day, the public gallery, which has been empty all week, is suddenly full of the most blatantly stonery stoners you've seen in your life. One of them is even wearing an Adidas t-shirt. The jury files in, we sit down, we look at the public gallery, and I think it's safe to say we stare at them. Defense barrister turns to see what we are looking at and visibly slumps, then glowers at the solicitor and hisses, really such an own goal. TL. DR marijuana farmer fricks up by letting his customers come to court. Plot twist. It was the prosecutor who invited them. Two high-profile men on trial for killing another guy, both ex-cops from the 80s, a notorious time in our country for police corruption. The first trial had been aborted after one barrister had made a casual comment that the other accused had already killed 2 or 3 people. Second attempt was 6 weeks into an expected 10-week retrial. All of the networks and papers were covering this trial. The gallery was always packed with law students because of the many uniquely horrific aspects of the trial. So, we're 6 weeks into the retrial. Defense 1 gets up to cross-examine a witness. Did you know of accused murderer 1? Yes. He was a cop and a drug dealer in the 80s. The court basically exploded. The judge immediately issued a non-publication order, meaning there was an embargo on all information from that day. It was early afternoon, but the judge excused the jury for the day, then spent the next day and a half deliberating over whether to abandon the trial. Over halfway through, and for the second time. The best oh crap moments are when your opposing counsel or opposing client says or does something that wins the case for you. True, in civil cases you usually know what will happen ahead of time, but in my state discovery in smaller civil cases is more limited, and clients don't always want to spend $30,000 when we can get the same result for $10,000. In an adverse possession case, the witness only needed to say, I use that area as my backyard, and I fully expected him to say this. It would harm my case, but I knew I could get around it. When asked about his use of the area, he said, no, I never really went back there, didn't use it at all, lost the case for the other side, and I could barely keep a straight face. It was completely opposite of what the witness had told opposing counsel off the record. Apparently the under penalty of perjury made him change his story. I had another case about losing multi-unit dwelling insurance because a guy's place was a fire hazard. I asked him if his personal insurer knew about the fire hazard. Yeah, and the jerks cancelled my policy. I also love it when I have a difficult party on the other side and the judge rips them a new one. I had a convoluted case with a lot of parties about nothing at all. The plaintiff was heinous. The 6 or 7 attorneys were working out calendars with the judge when the plaintiff starts yelling at her attorney from across the courtroom because she didn't like that he had conceded some little non-issue. The judge told her to sit down and shut up. I was sad that the case settled because she would have been amazing on the stand. I also love it when I have a difficult party on the other side and the judge rips them a new one. We call that getting bench slapped. Not exactly in court, but I was defending a juvenile robbery case, where there was very little evidence. There was supposed to be 2 guys, but they only picked up this one kid. He had no stolen property on him. He was picked up like outside his own house, wearing different clothes than the victim had initially said. This kid was on the honor roll at school. His family seemed kind and were involved. He wrote poetry and played instruments. I actually believed it was a legit mistaken identity case. I went to meet with one of the kid's mentors for a character reference, and he exactly matched the description of the other robber. I was the dumbass that almost screwed myself. I had 2 charges in 2 different courts. I accepted the first plea, which almost always carries probation, but my plea didn't have that condition. When it came time to accept the second plea, the prosecutor didn't include probation because she assumed my first charge put me on probation. She said as much to the judge, and me being a big dummy almost corrected her. My lawyer grabbed my shoulder and, "I crap you not," told me to shut the frick up. She doesn't know. You almost became that kid that reminds the teacher about homework or an essay that's due. I'm not a lawyer, but a court case I was involved with went this way. My ex-mill was a crazy bee. Me and my wife at the time had cut her off almost completely. Everyone in a hole she would give in and let her mom visit, which always turned out badly. Eventually we got divorced and I got full custody. Mill went nuts and decided to sue me for custody. I looked over the law, and for any form of visitation or custody you need to have had contact in the last 6 months, and she hadn't seen them for over a year. So we go to court. I can't afford a lawyer, but the law was pretty clear. She goes through 3 lawyers, each of them quit in turn. So she finally winds up representing herself. During the last hearing she was talking to the judge and said something to the effect of, "I don't want to get custody of them. I just want to be able to visit." The judge then asked her point blank, "This is a custody hearing. Are you telling me you no longer want to get custody?" She said yes, and the judge dismissed the case immediately. Unfortunately I'm not allowed to say too much, but basically, on charges of growing marijuana, stated he was growing herbs for medicine and gestured air quotes with his hands, and then whispered, "I kid you not, marijuana, bro. Oh man." Never ask a question to which you don't know the answer. Prosecutor suggested to me client that the canned goods he had burgled were to be used to trade for drugs. Me thinking the idea ludicrous, asked my client whether he has ever traded food for drugs, to which he replied that he once exchanged a frozen chicken for H. Needless to say, I didn't win that one. This is so true and sucks so bad in family court hearings because there's so rarely an opportunity to know how the witness is going to testify. Now, but have been on a number of juries. Kid was being charged with arson in his high school. First sign of trouble. Prosecutor is trying to get the investigator to say something specific. Note, this was a fire investigator. What did you see? Double quote. It was a bathroom. Anything else? Double quote. Sink. Double quote. What else did you see? Double quote. Mirrors. What else? Double quote. Trash can. Anything in the trash can? Double quote. Paper towels. Anything unusual about the paper towels? Double quote. They were burned? Double quote. Thank you. Then she calls the co-conspirator who has made a plea deal, who according to opening statements will testify that the kid defendant started the fire. The kid spoke and acted like a stoner. What happened? Double quote. We had some aftershave. We got some paper towels and poured the aftershave on the towels. Then I lit them. I mean he lit them. Double quote. Your Honor, I'd like a recess. End of trial. Not a lawyer, but was working at the jail when an inmate came back from court and immediately went on suicide watch. Apparently he was up for a plea deal and was only looking at 6 months, but started questioning some of the facts, which let in a ton of previously denied evidence. This new evidence linked him to 6 BNDs and rapes. He walked out of court facing a 99-year sentence, which he was certain to get, all because he opened his mouth. Well, also because he'd committed heinous crimes. I'm not an attorney, but a reporter whose beat is the county courthouse, so I've had plenty of these moments happen in front of me. A guy was convicted of attempting to murder several police officers. At his sentencing, the prosecutor revealed the defendant got a prison tattoo while he was awaiting sentencing of a tombstone with the names of all the cops he attempted to kill, but the defendant still had the audacity to beg for a lenient sentence. He got a few hundred years in jail. This is just an unfortunate birthmark, Your Honor. Not a lawyer, but I got in enough trouble in my teens to know what a judge doesn't like. Uncle's father decide they're going to conserve my grandmother and put her in a secured perimeter memory facility. In reality, they just wanted to pee away her $20 million estate. We end up in court with our lawyers. One thing I know about most judges' courtrooms, they want to be revered like a church. No talk back, no talking out of turn, wear a suit, even if it's a $20 Goodwill suit. Father, uncles all show up. All of them spend about an hour bad mouthing me. I'm keeping my mouth shut, looking at my feet. One of my uncles tries to examine me. I just keep my mouth shut until the judge tells him he's not a lawyer, and I'm not examination. None of them are well dressed. Sneakers, dirty sweatpants. My uncle, who's the ringleader, decides to start talking over his own lawyers. My lawyer makes some comment. The judge starts talking to her and my uncle's lawyer says something like, "Now hold on ladies." All they had to do was keep their mouths shut and not tell their lawyers how to do their job and they would have won. They pretty much handed Grandma and I the win. Good job protecting your GMA. Not that it was hard. Do you see the defendant here in court? Witness victim looks at each jury member then everyone in the audience. Nope. Judge hides his face behind file folder. Are you sure? Maybe over on this side. Witness looks confused. I'm not sure. I point at defendant. Maybe over at this table by that lawyer. Yeah, maybe. Keep in mind defendant victim knew each other very well. I was just interning in court during law school but I'm a lawyer now. Fight in a club. Someone had broken someone else's jaw and had 6 friends with him that insisted he had been identified wrongly because he never have a beard and the victim said he had a beard. They used a very specific phrasing to the tune of "my friend doesn't have facial hair because he is a professional in the food industry and it would go against the regulations." After 3 of the witnesses had repeated the same exact phrasing, the judge stopped one to ask if he knew what a couple of the terms in that line meant, and the witness couldn't explain it. Defense lawyer got busted for instructing the witnesses. She'd also gotten the defendant to reject a plea deal that exchanged prison time for a fine and community service. Lawyer here. I had a pre-trial conference at 9 AM at a court about 2 hours away, so I wake my butt up super early to drive in crappy weather to the conference. I get there and we're waiting for the other, in-town, attorney. All the while I'm grumbling to myself about how I'm from out of town and I can still make it on time. Finally the court calls the other attorney's office and gets a receptionist who tells us through tears that other attorney passed away the night before. Needless to say I was just happy to still be alive and we rescheduled for a few months later. Rude of him not to inform you he was going to die the night before. Ian Albert, my buddy, is going through a nasty divorce and I went with him to the initial hearing for support. Turns out his wife lied all over her deposition about everything from how much money he's making to being a violent drunk. She then tried to admit a secret recording she made of an argument that she baited him into having. His lawyer asks where the recording took place, which was in California, a 2-party consent state. Whoops. Step-parent adoption I was handling in law school. I was appearing before the court on a motion, literally just submitting a written brief and summing up my argument so the judge could think about it in chambers for a few weeks, when the judge stopped me halfway through my explanation of the motion, said I'm ready to sign the final order, and executed it right there at the bench. The client happened to come along for this one, and broke down, happy, crying before we left the courtroom. I felt 10 feet tall. I'm only in law school at the moment, but I saw this happen when I was watching a summary, non-jury, trial in my hometown about 3 years ago. It was a domestic abuse case, with the partner of the accused being examined. The prosecutor asked her to identify the person who she accused of attacking her and she refused, or said something along the lines of she didn't remember. She was clearly scared of the guy, but it seemed like she was trying to protect him on the stand for whatever reason. Well, that was ruined after the second time she tried to protect him and refused to identify, as the accused shouted out, "Him right here you stupid bee." It's hard to call stuff in court oh crap moments most of the time because generally you know what's coming. Even in criminal defense, I had some flubs early in my solo practice that more boiled down to lack of experience. But going for things that actually happened in court, I will go a little lighter than some of my fellow practitioners here. Closing argument in an assault case. I've learned to grow comfortable with my speaking style, and part of that is to cut loose a bit when it is appropriate. So I make light of some of the state's allegations given the testimony by the prosecuting witness. There is one guy on the jury panel that thinks I'm just hilarious. I had to wait for him to stop laughing. The oh crap moment, when the jurors came back to return a verdict, the same Rottful guy was elected foreman by the other jurors. Verdict was not guilty. I was the defendant, representing a non-profit that I volunteered for. The plaintiff was a 60-something grandma who was looking for a retirement settlement after falling out of her jacked-up pickup truck in our parking lot. The premise of her case was that our parking lot was in bad shape. It was, and that she fell into a pothole and broke her leg, which resulted in her having to take Coumadin and diminished her enjoyment of salads at the Friday night fish fry. No, really, it was going along fine, until my lawyer put up a photo of the pothole, taken the day of the incident, filled to the brim with water, after a recent rain. He asked the lady if she had gotten her foot wet, to which she replied that she couldn't recall. He talked a little more about how perhaps if her foot wasn't wet, it might have been because she fell out of the truck and didn't really fall into the pothole. He asked again if her foot was wet, and she affirmed that yes, her foot was wet. The oh crap moment came when he went back to his desk, flipped through her deposition and read the part where she was extremely adamant that her foot wasn't wet. Then he did some fancy legal stuff. The case was thrown out and I went back to work. That's some legally blonde crap right there. Not a lawyer, wife is, but she was just watching, making his statement before the sentencing. The defendant, who molested a stepdaughter, her friend and a niece, pulled a knife from God knows where, and stabbed himself twice before getting wrestled to the ground. How he got it through the metal detector, no one knows. He lived through that but died 2 months later in prison of natural causes. Something tells me a lot of molesters die in prison of natural causes. Now but I was on a jury once for a murder trial. Got selected and the trial started almost immediately. Man was charged with murdering his neighbor. They made their opening statements. There was even a bloody note. It wasn't terribly long but they clearly put a lot of effort into their strategies and were ready for battle. First witness was called. It was the son of the man on trial. I forget the first question but it didn't matter. He immediately broke down crying and invoked his Fifth Amendment right. Everyone freaks out. Judge and lawyers were like WTF. Jury had no clue what was going on but we were quickly ushered out immediately after that. A few minutes later it was explained to us what happened. The judge declared a mistrial. The prosecutor must have suspected that the father was taking the fall for the son who actually murdered the neighbor. But rather than risk losing, there was a mistrial while they sorted out who to actually charge and try. Not oh crap bad. Oh crap I can't believe she said that. First jury trial. Pretty serious charges. I'm cross-examining the alleged victim, and in answering my question she says, "Oh yeah, I lie all the time, needless to say, I won that trial." My ex forgot why she was in court, not a lawyer, but fully 2 years after we dated, a crazy ex got a restraining order on me as revenge for saying her tattoos sucked. She said I'd sexually assaulted her and threatened to rape her. We go to court. She tells her side. Judge picks at a couple holes in her story, then asks her, by the law and restraining orders, how she feels I am a threat to her safety, security, and privacy. Nobody should be able to say that about my tattoos. The freaking idiot just finished saying I was a crazed sexual predator, and then completely forgot. Dang, her tats must be super crappy. My client fell asleep during his custody trial. Between that and him testing positive for marijuana on the day of trial after he made a big deal accusing his ex of using drugs, she tested clean. I was so happy to be done with that case. I have another one that I've just remembered. Representing a guy accused of housebreaking, managed to persuade the prosecutor that they couldn't prove it, so they dropped the case at the intermediate diet procedural hearing before the case called in court. Headed downstairs to the cells to break the good news to my client, who was remanded in custody. Have an idle glance at the details of the charge while I'm waiting for the cell staff to bring him out. The house that was broken into was my then next door neighbor. Client was delighted that he was getting out. Him. Or cheers pal, you're the man. Can he wait to get out? Me. No bother. Right. See that place you definitely didn't break into? I live next door. So gonna leave my house and car alone please? Him. I sure pal. Me and the boys go up there stealing all the time. What car do you drive? I told him what kind of car it was. Needless to say, my car was broken into about 3 weeks later. Honestly, this is horrible and funny at the same time. Was in court going against a pro se plaintiff. He asked if I could argue his side of the case to the judge too. It's tough being a pro se plaintiff unfamiliar with the legal system, and I legitimately felt bad for him, so I just politely explained that it would be a conflict of interest. So, I'm not a lawyer, but I'm a forensic case manager for an alternative to incarceration program. Basically, our program accepts clients who have severe mental illness, and instead of going to jail, they are mandated to mental health substance abuse treatment instead, and my job is to follow them throughout the mandate and be the point person for the court and their therapists. We go to court with them and talk with their lawyers and judge and provide a psychological evaluation. I have many stories and only been here about a year. This one guy we had to stop working with even though we initially accepted him into our program. He was eligible for inpatient residential treatment because he was very sick and a violence risk. We referred him to places and got a call from one saying they interviewed him, but they were rejecting him. Why? When asked to describe himself, he laughed and said, "I'm the murdering type." Yeah, residential facilities don't like hearing that. But, okay, one more. Our judge in our treatment court is really great. He's understanding that clients have relapses, and instead of going straight to jail for violating their plea, he'll give them a warning or give them more time on their mandate. Usually, when clients are respectful and don't say dumb things. This guy, an old guy, at least 60, charged for selling his meds, comes up positive for C after a couple months of his mandate. Okay, that's fine. We'll work with that. Unfortunately for him, when the judge asked about his urine positive and what happened, he said, "I was out partying. There was drugs. I wanted drugs. No remorse." He was made to go to more intense substance abuse treatment and added time to his mandate. Reposting myself from years ago. Story from a friend of mine. He was defending a guy in court. Don't remember what he was charged with. The main witness for prosecution was on the stand and was asked if she could identify the defendant. She was scanning the courtroom and seemed confused. My friend was already silently celebrating because if she couldn't identify him, he could probably get all charge dropped. As he was mentally adding this case to the win file, he happened to glance over at his client, who had just helpfully raised his hand to make it easier for her to identify him. Even the judge facepalmed on that one. Was getting an expungement for a guy who had really turned his life around. This was gonna help him get a job as a coach at a small university. I'm in a very conservative jurisdiction. Client openly and voluntarily, without even the slightest prompting, admits to smoking pot. Expungement was granted, but there was a long lecture that made it seem like it was not going to be granted. Corporate lawyer but took on a pro bono immigration matter helping a victim of domestic abuse get her immigration status sorted out. She had been in the country for 20 years, originally legally, but not anymore. It took us multiple months to get a hearing scheduled. We've spent hours in US Customs and Immigration Services offices by this point. Her situation is somewhat precarious and we need to resolve this. She told me a few weeks before the hearing that she needed to reschedule because she was going to be out of the country. She said her daughter was going through a high-risk pregnancy and would be giving birth during that time, and my client was the only caregiver available family for her daughter. That's fine. We put together a letter, get a note from the daughter's doctor about the medical necessity, etc. USCIS gives us a hard time about it, but ultimately hearing is rescheduled. My client and her other daughter come to the rescheduled hearing. Client gets asked about recent trips out of the country. Well, I went on vacation to my home country last month. Instant cringe. She's in the US illegally, and it's unclear whether or not she should have been traveling on the passport she was. I jumped in and tried to clean it up for her, and thankfully the sus official was more interested in moving us through the system than getting hung up on past issues. However, she within an inch of this all collapsing around her getting kicked out of the country. I was representing my client during a sentencing for some petty burglary. The judge asked him if he had anything to say before he imposed sentence. My client started, "Your Honor, I just want to apologize." I'm thinking he's going to apologize for the burglary like they always do. But he continued, "This morning I tried to bring a knife into the courtroom, and it was freaking out on record before I could stop him. There was no way for me to strike it from the record, and my client is a freaking idiot. I still kick myself for that." This was told to me by a legendary trial lawyer in my area. I probably have some of the details wrong, but here is gist. It was a personal injury case against the manufacturer of an industrial fan. It was supposed to be child safe, but a kid got their fingers chopped off. The manufacturer was claiming that the plaintiff was only injured because the fan had been modified from its original condition. The defense lawyers had an exemplar fan that was straight from the manufacturer. They brought in an expert and, on direct, had him explain how it would be impossible for this kid or anyone else to hurt themselves. The idea was that the guard mechanism would have prevented people's fingers from getting too close to the blades. He was a well-qualified witness and gave very compelling testimony on direct exam. Unbeknownst to the defense lawyers or judge, the plaintiff lawyer had brought a very long extension cord and plugged in the perfectly safe fan. On cross-exam he went over the expert's theories and had him say unequivocally that it is impossible for someone to injure their fingers on this fan if it is unmodified. The plaintiff lawyer then walked all the way across the courtroom, turned on the fan as high as it would go and began walking it towards the expert. It was loud, so he had to kind of shout over it. He definitely had the jury's full attention. He gets right up to the witness and starts in on him, still half yelling due to the noise. "Show us. Stick your fingers in. No, come on. Stick your fingers in. I don't want to do that." The other side is jumping up to object, but the plaintiff lawyer is 2 inches from the expert yelling for him to stick his fingers in. The expert is looking terrified and shrinking away from the fan. The jury came back in favor of the plaintiff. It's my favorite example of show don't tell. The terms industrial and child safe seldom go well together. Not my story, but while getting on the elevator banks at the courthouse, another lawyer tried to hold the door with his foot and his shoe popped off and went up with the elevator. In this courthouse there are probably 20 elevators, so there was no way he was going to find that shoe in time for his court call. He freaked out for about 10 seconds and then said, "I guess I am going to court with one shoe on," and got on a different elevator. Hilarious. A famous high-profile case in my community had an incredible moment. A high-profile guy's house was raided, and they found a few shreds of evidence in the ashtray, and other scraps in the toilet. In court, he was asked if he ever burned evidence. He said no. When asked if he ever flushed evidence, this older man without the best memory of 2 minutes ago responded, "No. If I wanted to get rid of evidence, I would burn it in my ashtray." Guess who won the case? If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.